Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing the first of what is going to be a series on fantasy world building. There are a couple already on my channel about this, but over the next few days there's going to be a number of them being released, so check them out. Today we're starting with a favourite of mine, which is magic. In all of my novels to date there is some magic, but today I'm going to explore the different types of magic system, what you can do, what other people have done, give you some examples, and hopefully just generate some ideas for what you could put into your fantasy world. Let's start with some basics. Anyone who doesn't read fantasy and then hears about fantasy novels and hears about magic thinks that it's easy, thinks that it's the ultimate kind of MacGuffin, in that anytime there's a problem in your books, your characters can just wave their hands, read a scroll, and it solves all the problems, and therefore, well, it's easy, magic's easy. Why would you have it in your books? Why wouldn't you? You can just make up stuff whenever you want, and that solves the whole problem. Magic systems don't have to be complicated, they don't have to be really detailed, they can be kind of vague, but behind the scenes you have to know how they work, at least to a degree. Creating a magic system can be easy and fun, but is not a fix-all. It's probably easy to start with a couple of examples. I'll talk about magic in my books and then some in other books. So in mine, in the first two trilogies, magic comes from a place called the Source. This is the sort of life energy that surrounds and fills everything, and people draw energy from this kind of well. So how it works is, if you think about it like electricity, each person can kind of grab hold of the source and channel a certain amount of energy into their body. And if you think of like a fuse in your house, they can only take so much energy before the fuse breaks. Some people can take more magic in than others, and that's how it works with different battle mages. Some are stronger than others, and if you push yourself too far, you will kill yourself by channeling too much power from the source. In my case, some people will actually explode, their heads will pop off and all sorts of things. Might happen in the books, not saying if you haven't read them. But that kind of thing can happen. So that's one way I looked at it, that the magic is this well that has no limit, but the limit is the individual. And that just kind of makes it constrained. So nobody can just wave their hands and fix every problem or do anything. So, oh, I'll just move a mountain today. There has to be a cost, there has to be limits, and there has to be a structure in place behind the scenes. Another aspect of magic in my books is that someone who is very much against it, and we see this happen in many other series. There are a few people who are chosen and they sort of see themselves as gifted or talented or special, whereas other people see them as cursed. And this goes back throughout our history. If you look at the way witches and wise women and herbalists have been persecuted throughout our history, then you kind of understand this. Anybody who's a bit different or special or unusual usually ends up being an outsider. So in my books, there are some people that believe magic is inherently evil, and that the best way to get rid of it is to kill every child who's born that shows any signs of magic. Magic tends to manifest in sort of early teens, and their theory is, well, if you kill all the children, then they can't reproduce and they won't have any more magic users. Unfortunately, it isn't tied into bloodlines, so that approach is totally pointless. But that's just one way of approaching it in my books. Other people do it through other different means, how magic is distributed throughout the population. Maybe only certain species in your world can use magic. Maybe it's only one person born in a million, or someone who's been given a gift or cursed, or there's any number of options you can come up with for who is chosen to have magic. Another example is in Peter Mclean's War for the Rose Throne novels. I've spoken to him about his magic system, and it's the best way to describe his fantasy world is something like Peaky Blinders but with swords. It's about a man who comes back from war and finds out that his territory has been taken over by someone else, and he has to fight to reclaim his territory. And there's a young boy and a couple of other people who have some sort of cunning. Now, it's very vague and it's very mysterious and it's very weird, but that also makes it a lot more terrifying and scary, because nobody knows how the person does it, nobody knows if they can fully control it, and nobody knows exactly what they're going to do when they start doing some magic. And this makes it really, really exciting and interesting, because anytime one of these characters turns up that has a bit of magic or something, it makes for an unexpected scene, and anything can and does happen. So he probably knows what's going on behind the scenes, but we never find out. He doesn't lay it out. He doesn't have pages of description telling you, oh, well, if you do this, this and this is what happens. Or you combine these elements in the lab, making it almost chemistry-like. I prefer a slightly softer magic system. These are the two extremes: hard magic, where it lays everything out to the nth degree, and soft magic, where it's a bit more vague and nebulous, at least on the surface. Behind the scenes, the author might know exactly how it works and what the limits are, but on the page, it's quite limited. Another example of a magic system is, of course, Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series, which is currently being made into an Amazon TV series. This isn't a spoiler, this is in the basics of the world setup, so don't worry about this. But in his world, men and women can channel in the past, but in the present, the source of it has been tainted, so that only women can now channel the source safely. If men attempt to do it, they'll start to go mad. And so they're essentially cut off. Anybody who's found being able to channel is cut off. Women wave their hands. They don't necessarily use objects of power. However, there are objects of power, which I haven't spoken about yet. Magic items. In the Wheel of Time series, there are a number of magic items scattered around the world. And even with all the knowledge that the Aes Sedai have, who are the female magic users, they don't know how to make some of these items, or what they know what they do, they understand the principles of them, and they can do certain things. Like there's one called a truth rod. The two people hold it and they say certain words, it binds the person to that and they can't undo it. So the rule is that Aes Sedai can't lie. That's one of the kind of core principles that they have. However, there are ways around that. But sticking with magic items, there are a number of other really interesting things. I'm just going to make some examples. There could be a stone that could fire fireballs at somebody, or there could be a mask that when you put it on, you can see through walls. Yeah, these are ones I've made up. There are a number of other ones scattered in the book. I don't want to spoil any of them for you. But they don't understand the principles of how they were made. They only understand bits and pieces and how to use them. Someone's obviously tested them and had worked this out. So that suggests there were people who were a lot more powerful in the past who could make these items. And for all the knowledge that they have in the present, it shows that they're not nearly as good as those in the past. And it builds up the history of the world and it builds up these layers. So it adds quite an interesting kind of wrinkle to the magic system within the Wheel of Time. That then ties into how is the magic performed. It's quite old-fashioned, and I don't see many books have this with their magic systems, where they would read a scroll or they would mix a potion and then drink it, and that gives them magic abilities. Most commonly in books today with magic, they tend to maybe they do some chanting, or they just kind of wave their hand and say a couple of words and stuff happens. You go back to older magic systems in old books where they didn't say anything at all. It was completely internal. They manifested all of it outside by just imagining it. And there are other things in other books that say waving your hand or reading the words or saying anything are actually just crutches. They're there to help you, the magic user, do the thing that they want to do, and it's sort of a crutch. Which, you know, you can design your own systems, you can have this in or not, you can have magic items and potions and scrolls, you can have them saying specific words if you want. You look at computer games and all sorts of games like that. Look at The Witcher. The witches can say a couple of things and make symbols, and they have signs that cast kind of little inbuilt spells. So there's lots of different ways to do it. All I would say is whatever you do, create your system, create the internal logic, and have that written down somewhere for you to reference later on. The next thing to do with your magic system, once you've built it, is to test it. Play around with it, throw some characters into some scenarios in your mind, see what they would do, how would they get out of it, what are the limits, talk it through with a friend if you can, just to try and find the loopholes or the problems or the potential issues with it that you can solve up front. Even if it's a slightly vague magic system, you maybe just set the limits and talk it through with someone so they know what it might be. The next thing to think about is the cost. Magic always has to have some kind of a cost, whether it's physical or mental or spiritual. There's no mage that can do anything and just walk away and carry on as normal. You look at all of the famous books, all the famous wizards, whether it's the Wheel of Time or Lord of the Rings or anything like this, there's always a limit and there's always a cost. The next thing to think about is how much you want to explain. Whether you have a hard magic system or a soft magic system, how much are you going to put into the book? Are you going to feed the reader in drips and drabs as the story goes along and you unfold it? If you lay out breadcrumbs of information as you go along, then it means you can have lots of good stuff in your back pocket to surprise the reader. But it should never come to the point where something happens and the reader is just shocked and thinking, well, hang on, that makes no sense. You've set the limits and then you've broken it and you've changed the rules. So that kind of thing can annoy the readers. So make sure if you set something up at the beginning and it pays off later on, it's all carefully explained, or at least in a way that makes sense to the reader, so that it feels satisfied when the magic is used in however you use it. The next thing to think about, which I've touched on a few times, is how is magic viewed by society? Are people okay with it? Are they accepting of it? Does everybody have it? Is it a rare few? Is it common? Is it limited to a particular race, particular country, particular continent? Who has it? How do they get it? What are the limits? How do people view it? Like everything else with world building, the more you explain up front, the more it can constrain you and restrict you, especially if you lay out everything in the first book and then when you get to the third book, you want to bring in something new and realise you kind of shot yourself in your foot at the beginning. So either build it all in the background in your world Bible so that you know where you're going if you're using magic as a main part of the story, or drip feed the information to the reader. It gives you places to go, it gives you places to explore, and you can add to that system as you go. Hard system or soft magic system is something to think about. Another aspect to think about is naming structures. Whatever you call mages, magic users, conjurers, magicians, whatever it is in your world. If you have a system and different tiers, create it again, set it up, explain it to a portion, to a degree to the readers, and then move on and stick to that structure. Level of magic is another thing. How powerful is the magic within your world? I've got battle mages, which, as the name suggests, they're very, very overt magic, throwing lightning bolts and fireballs and everything like that. But some books have magic systems that are a lot more subtle, a lot more mild. It could even be in some worlds where magic is technically gone and no one thinks they have magic anymore, but other people have talents, little things that they kind of can blame on luck or superstition, or so-and-so's just very, very lucky, but in the background you know that a person has a little bit of magic that just makes them particularly lucky. Whatever it might be, it's another thing to think about. I've been talking for a while, but I've barely scratched the surface of magic systems, what you can do with them, how you can build them, and how you can create them and integrate them into your world. And that's probably one of the most important things. Magic has a knock-on effect to everything else that I'm going to talk about in the upcoming videos on world building. Check out some of the ones that I've already done, but it has to fit in with everything else that you've created to make it a cohesive and interesting and layered world that feels realistic for the readers. So if you are having magic within your world, spend a bit of time building it, move it around, play around with it, test it, talk to someone about it, and then set the limits of the magic system. That's all I'm talking about for today on magic. I could go into detail for a lot more because it's a huge topic, but hopefully this has given you a few ideas. There are other world building videos coming very soon, so check them out.